Okay, so this is the transit chart. You'll see that you have an inner wheel and then you have the outer wheel. The inner wheel is the same chart that we were just doing, except it shrunk. And then the outer wheel are the transits. You can see that you can put any day, time, minute, everything, and you can check and see what is happening in the person's life, past, present, or future. I'm just going to briefly tell you how I start with the transits. I always start with Saturn. Saturn is the planet of the skinny cows. It's going to tell me for about a 2.5 year range of a period what someone is going through. This particular person has 2 Saturn transits, and I would spend some time speaking about that. First, you have Saturn transiting the second house over the south node. These are called conjunct, just like in the previous chart. When 2 planets are close, in this case they're not side by side, but they're right one next to each other, they're called conjunct. When Saturn is conjunct the south node, that means it's opposite the north node. So you see you have 2 transits happening at the same time, okay? And you also have Saturn opposite Venus. So it's this sector of the 2-8 that's being affected. The 2-8 has to do with your values, has to do with your possessions, has to do with finances. So this is going to be an important sector of the chart for this particular person. They're going to have to be reevaluating perhaps their value system or their money or their love, what they think pleasure is, and so forth. Saturn conjunct the south node says that destiny is sort of stopped in the past, and it's telling you reevaluate, go backwards. It happens to be that Saturn is opposite Venus, and now our current Venus transit is retrograde. So you are thinking about finances, you are thinking about values, you are thinking about love from the past. And usually a Venus thing is about 8 years. So it could be about 8 years past and what what you did or what you didn't do, or reevaluating. And it's an interesting transit. So how do you do a transit? You first go to the transit that's on the outer wheel. That's what's happening today. Saturn is conjunct the south node. That means that this person has to reevaluate things from the past related to second house issues, values, possessions, money, etc. And then you go and you find it in the inner wheel. And you have to find a relationship between the outer wheel and the inner wheel. That means the second and the fourth have to be connected somehow. So perhaps it has to do with real estate. Perhaps it has to do with a marital home. Perhaps it has to do with the real estate in terms of where they live, not as an investment, but where they live currently, and they might want to be moving because they're thinking about new possible partnerships with people that are lending them money when we talk about Venus in the 8th, or they're moving because of a romantic interest. So I always start with Saturn. The most important planet in the zodiac in terms of weight, in terms of what it's going to do to your psyche, is going to be Pluto. But because Saturn is more of a consistent planet that every single person, every 7 years at least, is going to have some sort of transit, I always start with that. If you happen to not have a Saturn transit, all of your cows are fat, hey, great. It's going to be short-lived because within the next 2 years or so, you're going to get one. But rarely do I have somebody that doesn't have some Saturn transit going on. So I spend quite a bit of time discussing that and what the plans are and giving some guidance of how to integrate change so that they can integrate the oppositions and the squares. Remember, the oppositions and the squares in the natal chart cause conflict. The whole purpose of the lifetime is to integrate those planets into the psyche. We're talking about the Band-Aid. First, we bring awareness to say that we have that problem. Then we integrate, and we integrate those 2 planets by pretending that they get along. What would someone that has, in this particular person's case, Uranus trine Saturn do? They would find a balance between chaos and order. That's what you would help your client to do, to integrate, that they have a little bit of what they want to do and a little bit of what they have to do. A little bit of chaos, a little bit of structure and order. That is how you help a client integrate. Then behavior change can come where maybe they do something differently. In this particular person's case, maybe they're melodramatic when it comes to relationships, or they abruptly break up with their loved ones because they had a loss at a very young age and they don't want to get very attached to anybody. So we help them do it differently in terms of, let's go to marriage counseling, or let's go and talk about what is scaring you about commitments and things like that. Pluto. Pluto is the next one that I look at, and then at Uranus. One of the things that Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn have in common are that they are outer planets. The outer planets take many years to affect the client, and once they affect the client, they're very, very intense in terms of what they're doing. So we want to make sure that we spend time on those. Then the personal planets. Today I'm not going to talk about the personal planets. Those are Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Sun, the Moon, even Jupiter. Jupiter is sort of on the fence. That's an outer planet in the sense that it takes about a year, and then when you have it, it affects you positively for the most part, unless it's square opposing, but most people have a positive relationship with Jupiter, so I really spend most of the time on Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. This particular person does not have any Uranus transits right now, other than Uranus transiting the 6th house. So here it is in Taurus, and the way that I know that there's nothing negative is because I have to look at the cross. And even though Neptune is on the same fixed cross with the orb is how far away two planets are. When the orb is loud, it's kind of like saying, if the orb is very far away, it's like a whisper and it hardly does anything to the person. But if the orb is close, it's like screaming in their ear. My MO, my normal loudness. And these are too far apart. Now, this is something to pay attention to. It's coming, and you can warn the client that in a couple years they're going to have this orb get tighter and tighter and tighter, and that they are going to feel the opposition between Neptune and Uranus. But right now, it's far away. So ultimately, I would just focus on Uranus in the 6th. Perhaps they're going to have some change in their health. Uranus rules alternative health, so I would definitely recommend that they go an alternative health route versus a traditional allopathic route. It could also mean that they're going to have a sudden change in work because it's related to the 10th house of profession, and all of a sudden they might get this great opportunity, or they might be unexpected when they're least expecting that they're going to get a job offer. So you can warn them on those type of things, and those changes can be both positive and negative. So I always give both sides of the coin. And then Pluto right now is transiting the 3rd house. So there can be a change in school. Let's say they have children, or they're taking their own studies, or they're a teacher, so that could be many different things, or they can have new neighbors, or a neighbor can die. 3rd house is also siblings, and they can have a problem, or one of their siblings can get cancer, or one of the siblings can pass, or there can be a conflict there with a sibling. So there's many ways to interpret Pluto transiting the 3rd. And because Pluto is in Capricorn, it isn't aspecting anything right now, because again, the orb to Venus is very far, but that is something that is coming much later, because Pluto, no, actually it already passed. So they might have already had the breakup, or they might have already had the financial ruin or the financial difficulty with the Pluto Venus. And then you can spend some time looking at the personal planets like Venus, or Mars, or the black moon. In this particular case, this person's black moon is almost conjunct their Saturn. Black moon moves pretty quickly. It's going to be in Aquarius for a little while, so it's playing around there. So they might have some more depression, as I mentioned before. You've got Neptune transiting, and it's almost moving from the 4th to the 5th house. So you might talk about things like that. And so those are more of the individual sort of cookie cutter transit planets that are just transiting houses and things like that. So that's pretty much how I do a chart. I then ask the client if they want to do have any questions, and I usually leave about 15 to 30 minutes for questions, and the questions could be on anything, and that's the beauty of the chart. Any single question that you ask, whether it's about your grandchildren, whether it's about moving, whether it's travel, there is a way that you can find it through one of the archetypes. Quantum astrology states that we are all one and everything is connected, and I do believe that, and it's the astrology that I buy into. So for instance, if somebody wants to find out about an Aries in their life, I would basically look and see what is aspecting the Mars, or what this Mars over here is doing. So you can get answers according to anything that you ask. I hope that this has been helpful. It's just a rudimentary introductory video to how I do astrology, but if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at www.dryahiya.com. I have a contact page, and if you want a reading, feel free to send me a note. Have a beautiful day and have fun with this.